I remember my daughter's wedding invitation, how she folded it into thirds so it would fit in a card instead of an envelope, the way she used to fold her school notes when she was 9 years old and didn't want her brother reading them. I remember the sound the porch door made when I opened it that morning, a small complaint of a sound, like it, too, was getting old. And I remember the message from my son-in-law, sent to the family group chat 40 minutes before the rehearsal dinner, the one that said, "Seating's tight, so Harold's going to sit near the kitchen. That's all right. Right? That's all right, right." Like it was a question. It wasn't. "I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Before I go any further, tell me, where are you watching from, your town, your state? I'd love to picture you there while I tell you this. Welcome back to the porch." A quick note before we start. This story blends real experience with fictional details, changed to protect the people in it. The names aren't real. The lesson is. My name is Harold Whitfield. I'm 68 years old, and for 41 years I ran a sheet metal fabrication shop out of a building on the east side of Dayton that used to be a feed store. My hands still remember the shape of a brake press, even though I sold the business 3 years ago to a man named Curtis, who was decent enough to keep my name on the sign for another year, out of respect, he said. I appreciated that. Respect has gotten to be a rare enough thing that when I find it, I notice. The way you notice a good coat in the middle of a cold winter. There are 3 nights I remember with the kind of clarity most memories don't get to keep. The first was the night I asked Diane to marry me, in the parking lot of a bowling alley because I was too nervous to wait for a nicer setting, and she said yes before I even finished the sentence, and we bowled 2 more games afterward because we'd already paid for the lane. The second was the night, 11 years ago, that I sat in a hospital hallway, and a doctor with tired eyes told me Diane wasn't going to wake up again, and I went home and sat at our kitchen table until the sun came up. Not because I was waiting for anything, just because standing up felt like leaving her behind twice. The third night was my daughter's rehearsal dinner, the night my son-in-law's family decided I was the kind of father who belonged near the kitchen. Let me back up, because you should understand who I was walking into that room as. My daughter's name is Rachel. She's 31, sharp as a tack, works in hospital administration in Columbus, and she is, without question or competition, the best thing Diane and I ever built together. When Diane died, Rachel was 20 years old, in her junior year of college, and she came home for 6 weeks that I never asked her to take off. And she cooked dinner every night even though her mother had been the cook in our family, and Rachel had never made anything more complicated than toast. Some of those dinners were bad. I ate every bite and told her they were wonderful, because some lies are just love wearing a different coat. After Diane passed, I did what a lot of men my age do badly, which is grieve quietly and function loudly. I kept the shop running. I kept paying for Rachel's tuition, and later her rent, and later the down payment on her little house on Fenwick Street, and I never once mentioned any of it at holidays or brought it up as a debt, because that's not what it was. It was just what a father does, if he can, and I could. That's a piece of information I'd like you to hold on to, because it becomes important later. I could. Dot, dot. Rachel met Tobias Renner 2.5 years ago at a continuing education conference, of all places, both of them bored out of their minds in a seminar on healthcare compliance software. Tobias is a hospital administrator too, works for a different system, drives a car that costs more than my first house, and comes from a family that made its money 3 generations back in commercial real estate around Cincinnati. Old money, or at least old enough that it had time to grow a little smug moss on it. His mother, Vivian Renner, is the kind of woman who compliments your shoes in a tone that makes you check the soles for something embarrassing. His father, Gordon, mostly nodded along to whatever Vivian said, the way a man does when he decided a long time ago that peace was worth more than opinions. I met them twice before the wedding weekend, once at an engagement dinner where Vivian asked me, apropos of nothing, whether I'd ever thought about downsizing that little shop of yours, now that the market's so soft for manufacturing, and once at a Renner family 4th of July gathering where I spent most of the afternoon talking to their groundskeeper, a fellow named Dale, who turned out to be the only person there I had anything in common with. I want to be fair here, because fair matters to me. Tobias himself always struck me as a decent enough young man, a little soft in the way people get when they've never had to be anything else, but genuinely fond of Rachel, genuinely trying. I didn't dislike him. I disliked the temperature that dropped in a room whenever his mother walked into it, and the way Tobias's spine seemed to leave his body along with her. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant called Fontanelle, in a private room with a view of the river. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices because, if you have to ask, you've already answered the question. Rachel had walked me through the seating a week earlier over the phone, told me I'd be at the head table with her and Tobias and the two of us, meaning me and whoever Tobias's father figure equivalent was, positioned as a symmetrical set of parents. That was the plan on the Tuesday before the wedding. By Thursday morning, 40 minutes before the dinner, the plan had changed, and I found out about it in a text message sent to a group chat that included 11 people, so that by the time I read it, 3 other relatives had already responded with thumbs-up emojis, which is its own kind of quiet violence, watching people casually agree to your diminishment before you've even had the chance to feel it. Seating's tight, so Harold's going to sit near the kitchen, that's all right, right? I want you to notice something about that sentence, because I noticed it standing in my hotel room with my tie half knotted. He didn't write, "my father-in-law," he wrote, "Harold," like an item to be relocated, like a piece of furniture that didn't match the room. I typed back a single word, "Sure," because I've learned, at 68, that the first shot fired in an argument with family is very rarely the one that wins it. I do, and I wanted to see the shape of the evening before I decided what kind of man I was going to be inside it. The private room at Fontanelle was arranged in a horseshoe, the head table at the curve of it, facing everyone, candlelit, beautiful, the kind of table where a family looks like a photograph of itself. And then there was a smaller table, off to the side, half behind a folding partition that had been set up, I assume, to hide the swinging door the waitstaff used, because every 90 seconds it swung open, and a gust of kitchen heat and the clatter of the dish station rolled over that table like weather. That was my table, mine, and 2 of Tobias's cousins who'd arrived late and gotten swept up in the reassignment, and an elderly aunt of Vivian's named Constance who was hard of hearing and spent most of dinner asking me to repeat myself, which, given the noise from the kitchen door, I mostly couldn't do loud enough to matter. I watched from behind that partition as the head table was served first. I watched Vivian receive a lobster tail the size of a forearm, drawn butter in a little copper dish, a smile on her face like she'd personally negotiated its surrender. I watched Gordon get the same. I watched Tobias and Rachel served a shared tasting plate of something involving scallops that the waiter described at length and that I couldn't hear over the swinging door. And at my table, 40 minutes after everyone else had their entrees, a server apologetically set down a basket of bread and a small dish of oil and said the kitchen was a little backed up on our course. I looked at that bread basket for a long moment. I thought about the shop, closed now, the machine silent, the smell of cutting oil that still lived somewhere in my sinuses, no matter how many years passed. I thought about Diane, who would have stood up at that head table and said something with a voice like a struck bell, something that would have made Vivian Renner's shoe compliments curdle in her throat. I thought about all of it, and then I did something I want you to understand, wasn't performance. I laughed. The raft. A real laugh, quiet, to myself, because there is a particular comedy in watching people humiliate you by accident of their own carelessness, thinking it's an insult when really it's just proof of who they are. Rachel found out about 20 minutes later. She'd gotten up from the head table to use the restroom and walked past the partition on her way back and stopped, mid-step, looking at the breadbasket, looking at Aunt Constance leaning toward me and shouting, "What did you say, dear?" For the 3rd time, looking at the kitchen door swinging open and shut like a held breath. Her face did something I will remember until I die. It went white, then red, then very, very still. She didn't make a scene. That's not Rachel's way, never has been. She gets that from her mother, who could deliver devastation in a tone so calm you didn't feel the wound until you tried to stand up later and found you couldn't. She walked over to our table, crouched down beside my chair so she was at my eye level, and said, quietly, "Dad, why are you sitting back here? Ask your fiancé," I said. He handled the seating chart. She stood up. She walked back around the partition. And even from where I sat, I heard her voice not shouting, worse than shouting, that low, flat register she uses when she is genuinely furious say to Tobias, in front of his entire family, "Where is my father sitting?" There was some scrambling after that. A chair was produced. I was relocated to the head table, wedged in at the end near Gordon, who offered me half his untouched bread, the irony of which I did appreciate, and mumbled something about it being a mix-up with the venue. Vivienne did not apologize. Vivienne, in fact, spent the rest of the dinner conducting herself as though nothing at all had happened, which I've come to understand is its own kind of confession. I want to pause here and tell you what I did not do. I did not stand up and give a speech. I did not throw a napkin down and storm out into the parking lot like a man in a movie. I finished my bread, which was good bread, honestly, and when my delayed entree finally arrived, a chicken dish, perfectly nice, I ate it slowly, and I smiled at Aunt Constance. And I let the evening finish the way evenings do, whether or not you want them to. But something in me had gone quiet in a particular way. Not sad quiet, calculating quiet. The same quiet I used to get in the shop when a machine was running wrong and I hadn't yet found the cause, but I knew the way you know weather is coming that I would. Here is a thing about me that almost nobody outside my accountant and my lawyer knows, and that I am telling you now because it matters to what happened next. I did not sell Carter Metal Fabrication, sorry, Whitfield Fabrication. Forgive an old man mixing up names in his own memory. That's not the point. I did not sell my business for the number people assumed. Dayton is a smaller town than it looks on a map, and word travels, and the word that traveled was some vague, comfortable figure, enough to retire on, not enough to matter. The real number, the one on the wire transfer, was considerably larger, because what I'd actually sold wasn't just a shop. It was 41 years of patents on a fastening bracket system that half the HVAC manufacturers in the Midwest still license from the company that bought me out, a royalty stream that pays into an account Rachel doesn't know exists, alongside 2 commercial properties I still hold the deed to, one of which is the building 3 doors down from Fontanelle, the restaurant we'd just eaten dinner in. I had never told Rachel any of this, not out of secrecy for its own sake, but because I watched what money did to my own brother growing up, watched it turn my parents' attention into a scoreboard, and I swore that if I ever had enough of it to distort things, I would let my daughter love me for the man at her kitchen table, not the number in my bank account. I still believe that was the right instinct. Haven't. I only wish I'd understood sooner that other people don't operate from the same instinct, and that my silence about what I had made room for the Renners to fill in their own story about what I didn't. The wedding itself, the next day, went beautifully. Rachel was radiant. Tobias cried during his vows in a way that softened me toward him again, and I walked my daughter down the aisle with a lump in my throat the size of a fist. I put the rehearsal dinner in a drawer in my mind and decided, generously, that I would let it go. It was 6 weeks later that Tobias called me, not Rachel Tobias, which was unusual enough on its own that I sat down before answering. His voice had a texture I recognized from 4 decades of running a business and watching men come to me right before they asked for something. "Harold," he said, "I hate to even bring this up, but Rachel doesn't know I'm calling, and I'd like to keep it that way, if that's all right." There's that phrase again. That's all right, right. He told me his parents had made an investment, a boutique hotel renovation project, down near the river, the kind of thing Vivian liked to attach her name to at ribbon cuttings, and that the numbers had gone sideways. His words, in a way that had put real pressure on the family, and that there was a bridge loan opportunity, 60 days, fully secured, he said, against property, that could solve everything, and that he'd heard from Rachel, offhand, months ago, he claimed, though I never once discussed my finances with my daughter in a way that would have given him real numbers that I might be in a position to help. I let him talk for 9 full minutes without interrupting. I've found that people tell you almost everything you need to know if you just let the silence do its work. By the end of those 9 minutes, I understood 3 things, clearly. 1. The number he wanted was $140,000. 2. He expected me to wire it directly to his mother's company, not to Rachel, not through any account with my daughter's name attached. Structured, he said, as a family loan, though no paperwork was mentioned. And 3. This is the part that made something in my chest go cold and still. The same stillness I'd felt behind that partition with the breadbasket, he asked me, gently, almost sweetly. Not to mention the rehearsal dinner seating misunderstanding to his mother again, because things are tense enough as it is, and Mom already feels bad about it. She already felt bad about it. She had never once said a word to me. This was the closest thing to an apology I would ever receive, and it arrived wrapped around a request for $140,000. I told him I'd think about it. I hung up the phone, and I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen I sat in the night Diane died, the same table, and I thought about the breadbasket and the swinging kitchen door. Come. and my daughter's white, then red, then very still, face. And I made a decision that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with information. I called my lawyer, a woman named Priya Shah who has handled my affairs for 18 years and who possesses the specific gift of never once looking surprised by anything I tell her. I asked her to quietly look into the Renner family's hotel project, the entity structure, the loan history. It took her 4 days. What she found was this. The renovation project was real. The financial trouble was also real, but not from bad luck from Gordon and Vivian, having already borrowed against 2 other properties to cover a previous shortfall, one they'd never disclosed to their own family, let alone mine. And the bridge loan opportunity they were offering me wasn't secured against anything of real value. It was secured against a third property that was, itself, already collateral on a separate loan from a bank in Cincinnati, meaning that if I'd wired that money, I would have been, functionally, an unsecured creditor behind a bank that had first claim on everything, in a project that was already underwater. It wasn't a bridge loan. It was a life raft with someone else's name already on the only life preserver. I want to tell you what I felt reading that report because I think it matters. I did not feel angry. I felt something closer to grief, the specific grief of watching people reveal themselves fully, the mask coming all the way off, and understanding that the version of them you'd hoped for was never going to arrive. I did not wire the money. I also did not call Tobias back to say no. Instead, I called Rachel. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where I had to make a decision about the kind of father I was going to be, the kind who protects his daughter by keeping her in the dark, or the kind who trusts her enough to hand her the truth and let her decide what to do with it. I chose the second, because the first is what I'd been doing with my own finances for years, and look where quiet had gotten me. A breadbasket behind a partition. I told Rachel everything. The seating, what I'd overheard about her feeling white, then red, then still she confirmed she'd felt exactly that, and more, that she'd cried in the bathroom of her own rehearsal dinner and told no one, because she didn't want to make her wedding weekend about anyone's feelings but everyone else's. I told her about Tobias's phone call, the $140,000, the request to keep it from her, the true financial state of his parents' project. I told her, finally, about the royalty stream, the properties, the actual shape of what I had, information I'd withheld from her for 11 years, out of a love that I now recognized had curdled, without my noticing, into something closer to secrecy. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Rachel said in a voice I hadn't heard from her since she was 20 years old and burning dinner in our kitchen just to have something to do with her hands, "Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because I wanted you to love the man, not the number," I said. "I already did," she said. "You didn't have to hide the number to find that out. You just had to trust that I already knew the difference." That sentence sat with me for a long time after we hung up. I think it will sit with me for the rest of my life, honestly. It was, in its way, more of a reckoning than anything that happened at Fontanelle. Rachel did not go quietly into the family drama the way I might have expected. 3 days later, she called a dinner at her house, the one with the down payment I'd given her, and never mentioned again, and invited Tobias, Vivian, Gordon, and me. I almost didn't go. I told her I didn't need to be there for whatever she was planning. She told me, in that flat, calm, devastating voice her mother used to use, that I absolutely did. The dinner was simple. Rachel cooked it herself, roast chicken, the same recipe she'd burned 4 different ways the summer after Diane died, perfected now over 11 years, into something genuinely good. She served everyone the same portion, on the same plates, and set the table herself with 5 equal seats, no partitions, no kitchen door, and she waited until dessert to say what she'd invited everyone there to hear. She looked at Tobias first. "You asked my father for $140,000 and asked him to hide it from me. That's the first thing." Then, at Vivian, "You seated my father by the kitchen at my rehearsal dinner and never apologized, and then you used him as a solution to a financial problem you created and never disclosed to your own family." Then back at the table, at all of them, at none of them in particular. "I love you, Tobias. I'm choosing to believe you didn't fully understand what you were asking, or who you were asking it of. But I need everyone at this table to understand something before we go any further as a family. My father built everything he has with his hands, in a building that used to sell chicken feed, and I would rather live in a 2-bedroom apartment for the rest of my life then watch anyone treat him like a line item again. That includes you, Tobias. That includes all of you. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Gordon, to his credit, was the one who finally spoke, and he said, quietly, to me, Harold, I'm sorry. I should have said something at Fontanelle. I didn't. I didn't. It wasn't much, but it was more than his wife had managed, and I've learned to take honesty in whatever portion size it arrives. Vivian did not apologize that night. I don't know that she ever will, and I've made a kind of peace with that, the way you make peace with weather you can't control. What she did do, 3 weeks later, was send Rachel a card. No mention of the dinner, no mention of the seating, just a stiff, formal note about looking forward to hosting Thanksgiving, as a family, all of us. Rachel showed it to me and asked what I thought it meant. It means, I told her, that some people apologize in a language you have to learn to translate. Watch what she does at Thanksgiving. That'll tell you more than the card did. I did not, in the end, give the $140,000 to Tobias's family, structured or otherwise. Unquote. What I did instead, quietly, without announcement, was set up a trust, modest by the standards of what I actually have, generous by any other measure in Rachel's name alone, with Priya Shah as trustee, funded from the royalty stream nobody in the Renner family knows exists, dispersing over the next 20 years regardless of what happens in her marriage, regardless of what happens to me, not as a weapon, not as leverage, just as the thing a father does, quietly, if he can, and I could. I still see Tobias. Regularly. I still, believe it or not, like him, mostly. He sent me a long, genuinely humbled letter, a month after that dinner, apologizing not just for the loan request but for not being the kind of husband who noticed his own wife defending her father before I did, which struck me as an honest piece of self-assessment for a man his age, to arrive at. Gordon and I have had lunch twice since, just the two of us, at a diner not far from my old shop, where the coffee is bad and the pie is better than it has any right to be, and where nobody has ever once asked me to sit near the kitchen. Vivian and I remain civil. Civil is not nothing. Civil is a table both people can sit at without a partition. Last week, Rachel and Tobias came for Sunday dinner at my house, the same house Diane and I bought 39 years ago. The linoleum in the kitchen still the pattern she picked out in 1987 because I never could bring myself to replace it. Rachel set the table 3 places. No head, no foot, no back corner near a swinging door, and Tobias, without being asked, without making a thing of it, pulled out my chair before he pulled out his own wife's, and said, "Sit here. Harold, best lights on this side. You'll want it for reading later." It was such a small thing. A chair. A little natural light. I don't think he even knew what he was repairing when he did it. I sat down anyway. I said, "Thank you." And I thought, the way I so often do lately, of Diane, of a bowling alley parking lot, of a hospital hallway, of a breadbasket behind a partition, and of how much of what actually matters in a family isn't the lobster or the loan or the number in the account. It's whether, when the room gets crowded and someone has to decide who sits where, they think of you at all. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. It means more than you probably know. I believe every family owes each other the truth before it owes each other comfort, and that dignity isn't something you demand loudly, it's something you simply stop negotiating away. If any part of this reached you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the one asked to sit near the kitchen? I'd like to hear it. And if you're new here, welcome, there's a chair for you too, and I promise, it's nowhere near the door.